Hey, welcome to The Explainer. Today we're jumping into something really fascinating from social scientist Dan Ariely's book, Misbelief. We're going to tackle a question that, let's be honest, probably keeps a lot of us up at night. Seriously, why do people we know, people who are intelligent, reasonable, people we love and respect, end up believing things that just seem completely, utterly unbelievable? It's a real puzzle, right? So let's ground this with a real and frankly pretty wild example. You've probably seen this one floating around. I mean, it's a claim that just throws basic physics right out the window, and yet millions of people saw videos of keys supposedly sticking to arms and were absolutely convinced. So, how on earth does a belief like that actually take root?
Okay, so before we can really get into the how, we've got to be super clear on the what. Because it turns out not all false information is created equal, and knowing the difference is actually the first crucial step.
So here's the absolute key difference. It all comes down to intent. Misinformation is when someone shares something false, but they genuinely believe it's true. Think of your aunt sharing a questionable article on Facebook. But disinformation, well, that's different. That's a weapon. It is created specifically to fool you, to manipulate you, usually for some kind of political or financial gain.
So to really explain how someone goes from being totally rational to, well, not so rational, Dan Ariely gives us this really powerful metaphor. He calls it the funnel of misbelief. And it is the key framework for understanding this entire process.
And the word funnel is so perfect, right? Because it's not like a light switch that just flips one day. No one just wakes up believing the unbelievable. It's a gradual slide, a slow journey, deeper and deeper. And it's pushed along by some very specific and very, very human forces.
Ariely breaks this all down into these four key forces. Now, the whole journey down this funnel usually kicks off with those first two, our emotions, and the weird shortcuts our brains take. They act as the main entrance, the things that pull people into the funnel in the first place.
All right, let's start with the big one, the real engine behind all this, our emotions. When we're under a ton of pressure, when we're stressed out, our brains just don't work the same way. We become vulnerable.
You know, when life just feels completely chaotic and totally out of our hands, our minds are desperate for a story, any story that makes sense of the mess. And that desperation for an answer, for just a little bit of control, it opens the door wide for misbelief.
Ariely tells this heartbreaking story about a woman he calls Jenny. She was a massage therapist. She lost her job during the pandemic. Her whole life was turned upside down by this thing she had absolutely no control over. For her, the conspiracy theory didn't just offer an explanation, it gave her a villain, someone to blame for all her pain.
And this feeling of powerlessness, it can lead to this really profound psychological state called learned helplessness. It's basically what happens when our brain just kind of gives up after being in a situation where nothing we do seems to make a difference.
This was actually demonstrated in a pretty famous and kind of stark experiment. See, the dogs who learned they were helpless in that first cage, they carried that feeling with them. So even when escape was suddenly possible, they didn't even try. And for us humans, it's the exact same principle. Prolonged stress can do the same thing to us, making us grasp for these simple, powerful explanations instead of trying to find complex, real-world solutions.
So that's the emotional engine. Now let's shift gears and look at that second big force, cognitive biases. You can think of these as the mental shortcuts our brains use all the time to make sense of the world. But the problem is, sometimes those shortcuts lead us straight off a cliff.
First up is something called the proportionality bias. Basically, our brains are hardwired to be storytellers, and we hate a bad story. It just doesn't feel right in our gut when a tiny random event causes massive global chaos. Think about it like this. A microscopic virus randomly mutating and causing a global pandemic that shuts down the entire world. To our brains, that explanation just feels unsatisfyingly small. But a secret plot by a shadowy group of powerful figures? Now that feels proportional. That fits the scale of the tragedy, which makes it a much more compelling story, even if it's totally wrong.
And then there's the big one, the one we are probably all guilty of, confirmation bias. We all do this. We like to think we're looking for information, but most of the time, we're really looking for affirmation. We search for the evidence that proves what we already suspect is true.
Ariely tells this super personal and relatable story about finding a lump on his body and immediately going to Google and typing in symptoms of cancer. See, he wasn't searching for what it could be, he was searching to confirm his deepest, darkest fear. And that is the exact same mechanism that sends people spiraling down conspiracy rabbit holes online.
So here's the most crucial point of all. After digging into our emotions, and these little traps in our brains, it becomes really, really clear that this isn't about some other kind of person who believes weird things. It is so easy to point fingers and say, oh, that's them. They believe that stuff. But the truth is, this is about us. The forces that pull people down that funnel, the stress, the need for control, the mental shortcuts, they're universal. These are just features of being human.
The reality is we are all vulnerable. We are all susceptible. Under the right cocktail of stress and uncertainty and a desperate need for simple answers, any single one of us could find ourselves sliding down that same funnel of misbelief. And that right there is the most important takeaway from all of this.
So I'm going to leave you with a question to just chew on. Given how our brains are wired, what deeply held belief of your own, what obvious truth might actually be built on a foundation of emotion and mental shortcuts instead of on solid facts? It's a challenging thought, for sure, but a really vital one to consider.